2023. I am Sharon Baldwin, Director of Institutional Advancement, and I'm so excited to see everybody today. We have two amazing and well-deserved honorees today, Joan Papier-Lieberman and Stephanie Ember-Bassman. We also have two outstanding guest speakers, and we will hear more about our outstanding honorees at lunch today after the lectures. We thank you all for coming and for your generous support of Health Day, which will help support this year the important expansion of our emergency room, which I just saw 2 weeks ago. It's ready to open in about 2 months, and we really, really need more space. Shaare Zedek has the busiest ER and trauma center in Jerusalem, treating close to 500 patients a day. We treat more than 1.4 million people a year. And I feel very privileged to be part of the Shaare Zedek team. I was in Israel for Pesach, and of course I spent time visiting Shaare Zedek to get to see the latest updates. As always, I walked the floors and departments and visited the new cancer center, which is really modern, filled with sunlight from every angle, giving those patients a great feeling. I heard many incredible stories from patients, and one was about a 4-year-old girl. She was suffering from ongoing strokes, which is very unusual for a little girl. Her parents brought her to Shaare Zedek when she was already very ill and her kidneys were starting to fail. Upon admission, she was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm. Due to her young age and very small arteries, it was very difficult to treat this case. But with much deliberation and help from our top neuroradiologist, Dr. Absam, he was able to close up the aneurysm using a very special procedure. Within hours, there was a huge improvement, and within days, she was smiling and able to go home after a year of being so sick. We are very grateful to our incredible doctors and staff at Shaare Zedek, who are truly one of a kind. Today, I want to give special thanks to so many of you, our amazing 23 community chairs, our 157 committee members, and our generous 125 Health Day sponsors, and all of the participants who helped us to make it a success. Raffles can be purchased until 1 p.m. right at the registration desk. Our vendors are located, as many of you saw already, in the breakfast room across the hall, and they'll be open all day until 3 o'clock, except for during lectures. Kudos to my associate, Julie Levine, for working with me day and night to make today possible. She is simply the best. I thank Alex and Sarah and Ita and Jackie for all your assistance, and of course my colleague and friend, Rachel Wolf, to make it all happen. It is always my pleasure to work together with Debbie Kestenbaum, our Shaare Zedek Women's Division President. We commend you, Debbie, and we thank you for your dedication, your leadership, your ideas, and your commitment to Shaare Zedek. We can all be proud of Shaare Zedek as it stands out among so many hospitals in the world. In February, upon hearing about the devastating earthquake in Turkey, the head of our hospital, Dr. Ofer Meri, who is also in charge of the Israel IDF Field Hospital, left Israel with 7 of Shaare Zedek's top doctors for 2 weeks under freezing conditions to help save lives in Turkey. Our ER, trauma, and orthopedic experts helped treat and save children and adults who were desperately in need. And they guided the doctors in Turkey to reopen their hospitals that they had to close so that they could help save more people after the earthquake. Of course, you won't hear any of this on the news, but Shaare Zedek was there. It is now my pleasure, and I am excited to ask one of our co-chairs, Stephanie Katz, from the Upper East Side, who is going to introduce our first speaker today.
Dr. Chiti Parikh is the Executive Director of Integrative Health and Wellbeing at New York Presbyterian Hospital in collaboration with Weill Cornell Medicine. Growing up in India, Dr. Parikh developed an interest in yoga, meditation, and she started practicing at a very young age. After graduating as valedictorian from New Jersey Institute of Technology, Dr. Parikh embarked on a journey through Southeast Asia and advanced her interest in Eastern medicine. She graduated as an Alpha Omega Alpha Scholar from Robert Wood Johnson Medical School and completed her internal medicine residency at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center. She is board certified in internal medicine and integrative medicine with additional training in functional medicine, medical acupuncture, and Ayurveda. To provide the highest level of compassionate and individualized care, Dr. Parikh often combines cutting-edge Western medicine with the ancient wisdom of Eastern traditions into a truly holistic approach. She co-founded Integrative Health and Wellbeing at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medicine, which is one of the leading integrative medicine centers in the country, helping patients focus on preventing and managing chronic conditions while attaining optimal health. It is our pleasure to welcome Dr. Chiti Parikh, who will speak about practical tips to optimize your gut microbiome. Dr. Parikh.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I cannot think of a better, more important cause that unites all of us. So this topic of gut microbiome is one of my favorite ones. The reason being, it's a perfect example of how I can combine the best of Eastern medicine, and Western medicine together. So it just gives you a preview of what the future of medicine really is. It's not one or the other, it's both. So today we have a lot of information to cover. We'll talk about exactly what gut microbiome is, its role in health and disease, because a lot of people don't realize how gut microbiome is involved in not just stomach-related issues, it's literally everything. We'll also talk about practical tips of how to maintain gut health, and I'll also introduce some new cutting-edge methods to assess gut health that we use in our practice, and I'll make sure we'll have enough time for Q&A. So, about 50 years ago, when DNA was discovered, more than 50 years now, everyone thought that was the holy grail of medicine. We thought that all we have to do is map out the genome, and all we have to do is find a gene for a disease, and snip, snip, we have a cure. You find a gene for diabetes, snip, snip, diabetes is gone, right? That's what people thought was going to be the future of medicine. But here we are, decades later, and we still haven't gotten there. So what we realized as science progressed and decoded our genome is that we're not what we think we are. So if I had to ask you a question, out of 4 things that are listed here, which of these organisms would have the most genes? I mean, I would like to think it's a human being, right? Because I don't see chickens walking around with iPhones, right? I don't see grapes going to Mars, right? It's human beings. We're so complex, we're so advanced. So we would think we would have a lot more genes to code for such complex physiology. That's actually not true. A grape actually has more genes than a human being. And a small virus like COVID or flu virus only has 11 genes, but we all know the amount of impact it can have. So clearly, the number of genes you have does not necessarily make you more complex. So how are human beings so evolved and able to do all these amazing things without the right amount of genes? That's because we have partners. So we have partnered with trillions of little bacteria in our gut to do all sorts of things for us. So we might not have all the genes that we need, but we borrow them. We take them on a loan from the trillions of bacteria that are in our gut. It's a synergistic, symbiotic relationship. So we give them free food and lodging, and in exchange, they do lots of work for us. So gut microbiome is basically a combination of these trillions of bacteria, mostly bacteria, but it can also be viruses, fungi, all sorts of microorganisms that live within the gut. And now if we access their genome, now we have access to 150 times more genes than we do. So that's where our complexity in our physiology comes from. We don't carry it, but we owe it to the gut microbiome. So when we're born with no gut microbiome because we grow up in mother's womb, it's completely sterile. Our first introduction is when we actually enter the birthing canal. So even kids who are born through C-section, they acquire their microbiome through touch, through contact, by cuddling with the mom, and by just getting all the bacteria exposure as they enter the environment. And bacteria can be found not just in the gut, but also on your skin, vaginal canal, mouth, and about a third of these bacteria are pretty common amongst all of us. But 2/3 of them are individualized. So if I was to check microbiome for all of us, about a third would be similar, and 2/3 will really change. And also your gut microbiome today will look different from, say, a month from now or a year from now. It's constantly changing. So the reason why it's constantly changing is because everything we do, for instance, everything we eat, our lifestyle, each and every one of those things has an impact on our gut microbiome. So what role does this army of bacteria play? So the most important part of the gut microbiome that I think is very important is the immune system. So the biggest part of the immune system is actually in our gut, which people don't realize. And it makes sense because we're eating, introducing foreign substances into our body 3-4 times a day. So if I eat a bad piece of chicken, I want to make sure that my immune system in the gut is catching it as soon as possible and addressing it before it becomes a bigger problem for the whole body. So our biggest part of the immune system is actually in the gut. The bacteria also help us digest certain foods. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience where after you take a round of antibiotics, you might notice your digestion is just a little off. It's not the same. Or some of my patients say, I used to be able to eat yogurt, dairy, but after I took antibiotics, I became a little bit lactose intolerant. That's because the bacteria in our gut actually help us digest a lot of foods. So after a round of antibiotics, we're wiping them out, the good and the bad. So that's why our digestion often suffers. Another very important role of the gut bacteria is detoxification. We're exposed to tons and tons of chemicals, toxins, even medications we take, and also our hormones. Everything needs to be processed to make sure it's not doing any harm, that we have the right amount of hormones. All of this is done with the help of gut microbiome. And how do we know this? Now research has proven that gut microbiome plays a role in a lot of cancers that we see, from diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune conditions, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, infections, to depression, anxiety. I mean, just the list just continues to grow every single day. And the depression anxiety is particularly important because most people might not know this, but more than 80% of the serotonin, the happy hormone, is actually made in the gut, not in the brain. Right? So if 80% of the serotonin is made in the gut, all the medications we use currently for depression, anxiety, are all focusing on that 20% of serotonin in the brain, right? So we're missing 80% of the picture. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't respond to some of these medications because, again, we're missing the bigger picture. So a lot of the new therapies for anxiety and depression is actually focusing on, tailoring it or optimizing the gut microbiome so we have the right bacteria that produce the serotonin. So that's just the beginning. The research on the gut microbiome is just flourishing so much. Thanks to all the amazing researchers across the country who are really focusing on this, because if we figure out how to augment our gut microbiome, we can really prevent so many of the chronic diseases that we suffer from, right? So from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's to Crohn's, ulcerative colitis to different cancers, anxiety, depression. So there is cutting-edge research happening in this field to address all of these. And one of the cutting-edge treatments, which is not the sexiest treatment, is fecal transplant. As disgusting as it sounds, it is a real thing. We're actually using this in some of the hospitals to address some conditions. So there's research looking at fecal transplant as a potential potential treatment for things like Crohn's disease, for certain IBS, or even Parkinson's. So, and it's as simple as it sounds. It's very similar to a process like colonoscopy. Just like there are blood banks and sperm banks, there are actually stool banks where they take stool from healthy donors and they screen it for different infections, make sure it has a very rich diversity of good bacteria. And this stool essentially is put in a blender, for lack of a better term, and inserted during a colonoscopy procedure. We're seeing really good results from this. But again, this is the beginning of the treatment. One thing I always highlight in some of these treatments is that the gut bacteria, the gut microbiome, is a living, breathing thing, right? These are bacteria. They're not machines, right? So it's great that we can change our gut microbiome and put in a new one, but we have to maintain it, right? That's where a lot of this really focuses on. It's in gut health is all about maintaining your gut health. There is no magic cure, there's no magic fix, because our gut microbiome is constantly changing. So we have to figure out a way that we can sustain gut health for years to come. So there are good bacteria and there are bad bacteria. So some of the good bacteria you might have heard of is lactobacillus, which is commonly found in things like yogurt. Bifidobacterium is another one. Even E. coli. Most E. coli is actually good E. coli. There's only a few strains that are bad. So those tend to be the good bacteria. There are many bad bacteria as well, and some of these are listed here. But what I want to make a distinction of is that we're exposed to both, right? In our gut microbiome, all of us have good and bad bacteria. What we want is the balance tipping towards the good bacteria as much as possible. So it's not about never having any good bacteria, we all have them, but we want to control them by making sure we have lots and lots of diverse types of good bacteria. So that balance is really key. So how do we get the good bacteria to stay? I always tell people, you know, if you want proper gut health, good microbiome, it's like throwing a party. You have to be a good host, right? If you're inviting guests to your party, you have to serve really good food. You want to make sure they're comfortable, right? And that's the only way you're going to get them to stay. Otherwise, they're going to leave. It's the same thing with the gut microbiome. You have to be a really good host. You have to feed them well. You want to make sure they're safe, they're protected, and that's how you get them to stay, right? But we have a very sort of the Western mindset, right? Is that we can eat the way we want, we can do whatever we want, and all we have to do is take a pill to fix it, right? And people always ask me, okay, Dr. Parikh, this is all great, thank you so much. Can you just tell me which probiotic I can take? Which brand do you like, right? So again, I want to steer this conversation away from that, because these are living, breathing things. They are guests. We have to treat them right for years to come. I wish it was as simple as just saying, here's a probiotic, take it, and you're good to go. Because a lot of my patients take probiotics. They eat healthy, they do all these things, yet they run into issues. So that's why the rest of the talk I want to talk about, something that most people might not expect me to talk about, is do no harm. So I'll tell you my experience with seeing thousands of patients. What I find is most people eat a relatively healthy diet, like they're not eating McDonald's and chugging diet sodas. They eat a relatively healthy diet, they're mindful of making sure they're not taking too many antibiotics, so a lot of people are already doing this. Yet we have problems. So why is that, right? There's no point in me telling people, eat even a better diet, or don't do this, don't do that. What I want to bring attention to you is the real reasons why we have gut issues, right? And this is not something that you commonly hear about. You might have heard about it, but I want to tell you that unless we address this, right? First step in medicine is always do no harm. So unless we address this, it doesn't matter how great your diet is, unfortunately, right? You're not going to get the full results from the perfect diet if these things are a problem. So first and foremost, antibiotics, right? Recent studies actually show that if someone is exposed to more than 5 rounds of antibiotics before age 5, which is silly. I have a 9-month-old at home, and I know how often kids get sick and how many antibiotics we give them. So 5 rounds of antibiotics before age 5, forget it, we've all gotten it, right? So just doing that often increases your risk of autoimmune conditions by 30% as an adult, right? So just to give you an idea, it's not about antibiotics you took last year or 2 years ago. So my patients are like, Dr. Parikh, I'm very cautious, I hate antibiotics, I don't take them. But I ask them, when you were little, did you get a lot of ear infection? Did you get a lot of strep throat, right? Because it doesn't matter if it was just a couple years ago you didn't take it, but even childhood exposure leaves an imprint in our gut. So if you do have to take antibiotics, I always tell people, ask your doctor, show me the proof that I actually need this, right? So if you have an infection, don't just say, oh, I have a cold, this is annoying, let me just get a Z-Pak, right? Don't take it lightly. Most of the times we're overprescribing and giving antibiotics inappropriately, and that's causing antibiotic resistance, which is the biggest threat to our gut microbiome. So instead of being part of that, let's be part of the solution. And if you do have to take antibiotics, I always tell people to pick the one, tell your doctors to pick the one that you really need instead of just giving you a blanket one, right? So let's say you have urinary tract infection. We can actually do cultures to see what type of bacteria you have, which type of antibiotic, the least potent one that you can get away with, right? So we can start there. And if you do take antibiotics, I always recommend people take probiotics 3 to 4 hours separated from the antibiotic dose. And don't just take probiotics during antibiotic course. Take it from months after, right? It's not just about those few days. And during that time, food is always best. Increase your intake of, probiotic, prebiotic rich food, which we'll talk about. So antibiotics is a common one, right? Everyone knows about this. So that's there. And another thing about antibiotics, I'll tell you, most of my patients don't get it by taking it for a cold or a fever. They get it to their food. So I'll give you an example. I was on a road trip by Yellowstone, and I was driving around, and I saw lots of farm, and there was a farm store, farm supply store. So I went in, and I saw that in a farm supply store in America, you can actually walk in and buy barrels, literally barrels of antibiotics. And I saw some of the names, and my jaw dropped, because some of the antibiotics that I saw there, that you can, I can just walk in and buy a barrel of something called clindamycin or vancomycin. Just to give you an idea, if I had to prescribe that antibiotic to someone in the hospital, I spent a lot of time in ICU, working in ICU. If I had to prescribe that to someone in the ICU who's critically ill, I have to get permission from the hospital pharmacist. I have to get permission from an infectious disease doctor before I can prescribe it. Okay? So, but the same antibiotic, we can give it to our pigs, our chickens, our cows, turkeys, fish, not a problem, no questions asked, right? So all of this filters through us, right? Eventually, if we eat these things, it's going into our body, right? So that's probably one of the highest amounts of antibiotics we're often getting. And this is like microdosing antibiotics, which is even worse, right? Because it's this low dose of antibiotics we're getting constantly, little bit every single day, that is a bigger threat than you taking an antibiotic for a few days for like a tooth infection. And the next one I want to bring your attention to is pesticides. So pesticides are essentially, same thing as antibiotics, right? But they're targeted towards common pests. So this is one of my pet peeves. Is America is really lagging when it comes to rules and restrictions as to what goes into our food. And I'm sure a lot of you must have experienced when you leave the country, you go to Europe, you go to Israel, you eat a tomato tastes like tomato, right? And the food just tastes better. And a lot of my patients who have gut issues, they say, Dr. Parikh, I went to Greece for a week, I went to Italy, I ate pizza, pasta, cheese, nothing happened. And God forbid, if I look at gluten here, I will pay a price, right? So how do we explain that? So I have an explanation for that. So pesticides, in America, so just this number stuck in my head, in America we use 300 million pounds of pesticides that are banned in the EU. This is just the pesticides that are banned in the EU that we are using, 300 million pounds of it every year. Forget about the rest of the pesticides, right? There's really no oversight, very limited oversight. So that's one of the biggest threats to our gut microbiome. So I always tell people, when possible, buy organic. That's one thing you can do, right? So Environmental Working Group publishes a list of things that you should buy organic. It's called Dirty Dozen List. They come out with this every year. It looks very similar every year. And it cleans your kitchen list. So I always tell people, print this out, put it in your fridge, right? So you know Dirty 12, so Dirty Dozen, and these are the things that you should spend money on buying organic. Not only that, even if you buy organic, this is something I tell all my patients to do. Let's say you buy strawberries, right? The strawberries have to be washed properly. All of these things have to be washed properly. So what I do is I take a big bowl, fill it up with cold water, put my strawberries in there, and put a couple of tablespoons of baking soda or baking powder, and let it soak for 15 to 20 minutes. So studies have shown that doing it this way, even after 15 minutes, you get significant reduction in pesticide chemical residue from the produce. So just getting in the habit of cleaning your produce properly this way will really go a long way. So keep in mind, this is a great list to memorize. And then the other one I also want to highlight is, why do we need pesticides and why do we use them so much? It's because we're spoiled a little bit, right? If it's in the middle of the summer and I want, I don't know, pumpkin, or if it's middle of December and I want blueberries, they're not coming from upstate New York, right? They're coming from across the country or across the world. They might be coming from Chile. So if anyone's ever grown anything, you know how hard it is to maintain it, especially like strawberries. So my strawberries are coming and making a trip from Chile. They have to be coated in something to make sure they make the trip. They live in your fridge for a few days before you eat them, right? So you can imagine if we buy local instead, things that are in season, you can get away with minimal pesticide residue, right? So I'm always a big fan of supporting local farmers, going to farmers market, and eating seasonally, because then you know it's making a trip of 50 miles rather than 5,000 miles to get to your refrigerator. So buying local, eating seasonal food, very, very important. Another one, this is a little controversial because people don't like to hear this. One of the worst things you can do for your gut microbiome is artificial sweeteners. So including Equal, Splenda, all of the ones that have been marketed, stevia, all of them, they all do damage to your gut microbiome. So one of the ways they figured this out is really interesting. So what researchers did was they took a group of mice and fed them sugar water for 7 days. Nothing happened, no change in the gut microbiome. The other group of mice, they gave them sugar water plus artificial sweeteners. Within 7 days, they showed signs of prediabetes, and they showed signs of very different gut microbiome. Then they went a step further. What they did was they took the gut microbiome from the purple mice and put it in the white mice. Even though the white mice never had artificial sweeteners, but they got the gut microbiome from the purple mice. And then they started developing signs of early diabetes and changing the microbiome. So that's how they figured out that eating some of these things is actually changing our gut microbiome and causing a lot of these conditions, right? So that's why artificial sweetener is just not worth it. You know, have a good quality brown sugar or some of the good quality sugar, just a pack of it in your coffee. It's really not the end of the world. It's just not worth it. We've just been marketed and brainwashed so well, saying, you know, that one little scoop of sugar in your coffee is doing all the damage, right? It's not. That's not what the problem is. So I would really deter you from doing any type of artificial sweeteners. It's just not worth it. Chlorinated water. Why do we add chlorine to our pools, to our water? To kill bacteria, right? And what happens if we drink chlorinated water all day long? It's like microdosing on antibiotics, right? Same thing. So invest in a good quality water filter. A lot of even the Brita filters are pretty good at removing chlorine. Environmental Working Group's website has an amazing resource for different types of water filters, so you can look at all the ones that they've tried out, they've tested out. And one thing I forgot to mention is Environmental Working Group also did a research study where they looked at different oat products to see how much, I'm sorry, I'm going to rush a lot of bubbles here. They did a research on oat products, and what they found was a lot of the oat products that are on the market contain some of the highest levels of pesticides. For instance, Cheerios, which we give our kids, right? It's healthy. Cheerios actually had more pesticide in it than all of the vitamins listed in the back combined, right? But pesticide is not listed as one of the ingredients. You don't have to, right? So oats, even though oats are marketed as very healthy, like everyone's trying to drink oat milk, eat oatmeal in the morning, which is great. But oats actually have some of the highest amount of pesticides because what the farmers do is they douse the oat plant in pesticide to dry it out. And drying it out makes it much easier to harvest. So oats actually have a lot of pesticide residue on them. So oats is one thing, I always buy organic. It's worth spending. It's actually very hard to find organic oat milk. There's only a couple of brands I've seen at Whole Foods that have organic, because most people are not aware of this. So please, one change you can make, two changes. The Dirty Dozen list, memorize it, and if you ever buy any oat products, make sure it's organic. They've done studies with organic oat products, minimal to no residue of pesticides versus conventional ones. And another one is soy products. So 95% of soy grown in this country is meant to feed animals, not human beings, and it's a lot of it's very genetically modified. So if you are buying any soy products, make sure that's also organic. Tofu, edamame, soy milk, anything made out of soy, make sure it's organic. And last but not least, PPIs. So these are your acid blocking medications that we use. WHO, World Health Organization, actually said that PPIs, these acid blocking medications, are a bigger threat to antibiotic resistance than antibiotics themselves, because more people take these medications than they take antibiotics. So I spend a lot of time with my patients to get them off of these acid blocking medications. If they have to take it for 30 days. Make sure you take it for the right reason, not just because you have a little bit of upset stomach or something. Doctors will say, just take PPIs, like they're candy. You're not. So PPIs are very dangerous in the sense of long-term effects. If you take it for a couple of months, not a big deal, but just be mindful that these are not as benign as they're made out to look. If you have to take a probiotic, there are some tips. So I look for diversity. So if I'm going to pick a probiotic, I want something that has 5, 10 different types of bacteria. Diversity is key with probiotics. These are some of the bacteria you might see on the label: Lactobacillus, Bifidobacterium, and the typical dose is around 10 to 20 million. More is not always better when it comes to probiotics. So you might say, oh, I found one for 100 billion, why not? 100 billion is better than 10 billion. But more is not always better. That can actually cause more gas, bloating symptoms. You don't necessarily have to refrigerate it. So if the instruction says refrigerate it, make sure you do properly. But now the technology is pretty good. You don't necessarily have to buy refrigerated ones. They're not necessarily better. And look out for fillers. A lot of these have gluten or dairy. So if you're sensitive to those things, just make sure it's not part of the ingredient. And one condition I'll highlight, something called small intestinal bowel overgrowth, that a lot of people struggle with, similar to IBS. That's one time where probiotics are usually not recommended because it can make symptoms worse. This is a list of probiotic foods, and in every culture, right, before refrigeration, people all across the world had to figure out how to preserve food, right? So every culture has their own prebiotic foods. So I always encourage people to explore and experiment. More is not always better. You don't have to drink a whole gallon of kombucha to get your daily dose of probiotics. So just be mindful of dosing, but try to rotate these. Try different foods and see what you like. And prebiotics are just as important. Prebiotics is basically being a good host. You have to feed this bacteria, right? You can't just take a probiotic without a prebiotic. Prebiotic is food for the bacteria. It's basically fiber. So fiber is the unsung hero of gut health. That's one thing I always tell people to take or increase in their diet. So from different fruits, vegetables, whole grain, legumes, you can get your dose of prebiotics from any of this. And I always tell people to vary it up, right? So we want to feed our guests, we want to be a good host, we want to feed our guests, and by doing that, we're really increasing our intake of fiber. And one other thing I wanted to highlight, what we do in our practice, sometimes we see a lot of people with different gut-related conditions, autoimmune conditions, and one of the things that I personally have done, and I love having that information, is actually stool test. We can actually test people's gut microbiomes now. So by testing the gut microbiome, we can see how many good bacteria do they have, how many bad bacteria do they have, are they digesting their food properly, are there inflammation markers, inflammation cells present. So there's a lot of information some of these stool tests can actually give us. And that's really changed my practice. Because I can actually take a look. Because most of my patients end up going to the GI doctors. They get their colonoscopy done, endoscopy done. The doctor says everything looks good, you don't have cancer, thank God. But what about the symptoms I have? You say, okay, take gas ax, take fiber, maybe take some probiotics, and see you in 2 months, right? But clearly that doesn't work for most people. So that's why doing a test like this has really helped me understand what the root cause is and addressing that, instead of just putting a Band-Aid on it. So these are some of the things that we are doing in our practice, and I feel like this is really the future of medicine. So really, what you eat, you're not just eating for your own health, you're actually feeding the gut bacteria as well. So a diet that's more plant-based, full of fiber, different types of fiber, fruit, vegetables, whole grain, is really ideal for gut health. And do no harm is the #1 thing, right? So all the things I mentioned to avoid, we have to prioritize that. Because it doesn't matter how much you change your diet, those things are getting in your way, it's really not going to matter. So we talked about probiotic foods, prebiotic foods, and ultimately when in doubt, we can actually test the gut microbiome. So I hope this was helpful. I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A, so I'll end here. Thank you so much.
If there are any questions, Dr. Parikh is going to take 2 questions. There's a microphone in case you want it.
What do you think of taking a psyllium supplement, such as Consol?
Yeah, psyllium husk fiber is really good, and it's one of the really good sources of prebiotics. So a lot of my patients, if I feel like they're not getting enough from their diet, then that's always a good option.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, Susan.
Hi. Does your office do the SIBO testing, the breath testing, and do you think that that's something that helps figure out what's wrong with?
Oh, absolutely. So we do SIBO testing. It's usually done in it's a home kit. We send to patients that do it at home. It's a SIBO breath test to really assess if there's a major imbalance in the gut. And we have a very detailed approach in treating something like SIBO. The traditional approach is just giving antibiotics, something called Xifaxan. So, and recent studies have shown that people who take Xifaxan over and over again often relapse much more quickly. And there have been head-to-head trials comparing the antibiotic Xifaxan with some of the herbal supplements and protocols. So we often go that route because it is a little bit longer treatment course, but I find it's much more stable and people don't relapse as much. So in some patients who are very severe cases, we might use antibiotic at first, but we also make sure that there's a maintenance plan. But yeah, there's an easy kit that we send to patients. They do it at home. It gives us a ton of information.
So you don't do it in the office?
No, you don't need to. It can be done at home.
Hi, you want to just use the microphone, it'll be easier, thank you.
So, I give my kids a lot of Benadryl and Tylenol and Advil. Is that like along the same lines of antibiotics?
No, not so
I could do that literally.
No, it's not going to alter the microbiome. That's not an issue. It's as long as it's not antibiotics.
But it doesn't affect that.
No, not necessarily. The only one thing I will say is some of the Benadryl, Tylenol, they have artificial food dyes. So just buy one that is dye-free. There's plenty of option nowadays because in America we use something called red 40, especially in Tylenol. It gives it the classic red color. That's actually not good for the gut microbiome. So just be careful of the dyes that are in some of these over-the-counter medications.
There was a dictionary full of information. I thought I could remember some of them, and then it kept adding and adding and adding. How did we get this information in a pamphlet or a book?
Yeah, I'm happy to share part of the presentation that has some of that information, and I can share it if you want to email it to everyone. Happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Dr. Street? 1 minute.
Thank you so much. I think that was an exceptional lecture, and thank you.